And good afternoon to everyone. Buenas tardes e boa tarde. It's a great honor to be here today and open the second panel of this event, which I know brings together a lot of international academic communities as well as national academic communities. So I'm very pleased to be part, and I thank the organization for the impeccable work so far. We know that it demands a lot of care to run the show as smoothly as it's been so far. So thank you. And I would like to also extend a special thank you for the participation of Professor Comas, who is joining us in this panel this afternoon on behalf of the organization team. We are deeply honored to count on your participation in the conference today, Professor Comas. So I will make a brief introduction of each one of our speakers right before they speak, in case people join and leave. So I'm happy to introduce Suelen Camerin, who is an architect and urban planner at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. She also has a master in theory, history, and criticism of architecture by the Research and Graduate Program of Architecture of the same institution, where she also obtained a doctoral thesis in 2016. She was also a member of faculty of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and she's been working since 2011 in research groups on modern Brazilian and Latin American architecture, coordinated by Professor Comas. So I welcome Suelen to start her presentation.
So thank you, Marina, and thank you all critical team. So I'm Suelen. I am a PhD student at Propar, at Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre. My advisor is Professor Comas, that will also present in this panel. This presentation came from my master dissertation that analyzed the production of Benitez. So this presentation today proposes a comparative analysis between the compositional procedures, method of work, and structural behavior of the architectural elements of the Paraguayan Office Gabinete de Arquitetura that is coordinated by Benitez and Glória Cabral, and those of Uruguayan engineer Eladio Dieste. So the analysis relies on the Dieste's main work built in Uruguay and Brazil between the 50s and the 80s, and some selected buildings of Gabinete de Arquitetura in Paraguay between the 90s and the beginning of 2010. This comparison is not new. On the contrary, the expressive forms made with brick and the geographical proximity often raise questions about a supposed influence of the Dieste on Paraguayan work. More than pointing out differences and similarities, this presentation intends to reflect on the persistence of the modern disciplinary tradition in the architecture of Latin America since the 90s. Besides, instead of raising and discussing a continuity between the two practices, this study aims to contribute to the hypothesis that the generation of architects to which Benitez and Cabral belong, more than questioning postmodern positions and claiming the relevance and vitality of the modern tradition, is to expand the elements and compositional procedures of their precursors. This study also surpasses the superficial association of what's not European or North American to regional or local components, assuming that the brick, in these cases, is not used to evoke symbolic aspect, but as a feasible means of achieving architectural propositions. So geometry as responsible for structural resistance is a recurrent strategy in both productions. Bending or folding vertical and horizontal surfaces gives to the brick the possibility to shape slender walls and roofs. While Dieste chose the double curved wave walls with brick-laden loco in stretcher bond, as the sequence of conoids of the nave side walls of Cristo Obreiro Church in Atlântida, and the wavy mirrored walls of the Montevideo Shopping Center, Benitez and Cabral prefer the folded walls made with rectangular, triangular, or trapezoidal panels prefabricated with Shiner brick. The Estes curved planes are load-bearing. The pleated plates of Benitez and Cabral are veneer masonry for concrete structures or internal walls that divide spaces. As the pre-molded plates of the inner courtyard at the Center for Retired Banking Employees of Paraguay, the internal zigzag wall of Unilever headquarters, the contrasting folds on the facade of Smeraldina House and on the corridor of Lazanita's house, or yet the pleated closure of the hydrotherapy building at the Teleton Children's Rehabilitation Center. Throughout more than 50 years of work, the Estes designed and calculated a large number of curved and folded elements in reinforced ceramics to overcome large spans and cover ground floor buildings. Except for the folded plates that cover the San Pedro Church in Durazno, the most part of these roofs are self-supporting shells with double curved walls, as those of the church in Atlântida, and those with sheds that cover the producers' pavilions at the Ceasa Market in Porto Alegre, or barrel vaults as those of the Merchants Pavilion and the ones supported by central pillars of the Portigo at Ceasa and at the Salto Municipal Bus Terminal. There are at least 3 types of roofing in Benitez and Cabral projects: the flat or slightly curved slabs, as the concave with tilted bricks at the Buffon House, and those with broken bricks from Teleton. The vaulted roofs, which section is usually an arc that moves in one direction, as the ones with prefabricated triangular elements that cover the access and the front gardens, or the precast in place in concrete and pieces of brick inside the physical therapy block at Teleton. And finally, the folded, as the inverted pyramids at the same project. The brick is shattered to cover the base of the wooden malls that shape the concrete, plays the role of the light aggregate in the hollow core slabs, or yet appears in precast elements that work as permanent mold for concrete on coffered slabs and curved roofs. Unlike ceramic cobblegalls, in which the grid is made with pieces manufactured for this purpose, in the ETSAM Benitez Cabral projects, the voided surfaces are made with common brick. In some cases, the opening grain is given by the size of the brick. In others, the grain is a result of the combination of bricks and elements of different geometries, usually prefabricated on the construction site. In addition to controlling visual permeability and sunlight incidence in the interior spaces, this plastic operation highlights the countless possibilities of brick. Except for the lancet window of the church in Durazno, the voided surfaces stand out in the Estes production when it comes to reservoir towers, bells, and communication equipment. In this case, these perforations are not just plastic operations, but have at least one important practical function in minimizing the impact of the winds on the structural system of the towers. In the cylinders and truncated cones, the suppression of ceramic elements makes even more evident the fine grain of the handmade work of bricks bonding. In the pavilion buildings, the Estes prefers the large opaque ceramic planes that let the light in through small perforations or narrow openings, as the gap between the pleated surfaces that cover the San Pedro Church, or the small rectangles on the wave side walls and the inclined panels of the main facade of Cristo Vero Church, for example. On the other hand, Benitez and Cabral prefer the uniform grids of small prefabricated brick elements, as the large lattice that covered the longitudinal facades of Unilever building, the wall that separates the ramp from the living room at the Buffon House, and the 2 voided vaulted structures at Teleton. In Benitez and Cabral recent projects, these voided elements appear also in slabs, beams, and pillars as permanent formwork for cast-in-place concrete, helping to shape lattice beams and coffered slabs, as in the Quinto Tia Coral at the new Faraúna classroom building. The extensive use of fold and curved walls and roofs makes clear Benitez and Cabral's intention to achieve the structural system stability by shape, in an effort to overcome construction limitations of brick and optimize material resources. a clear reference to the ETSA's practice based on the relationship between geometry and material resistance. However, despite the similarity in the use of brick in complex and unusual composition operations and structural systems, they differ mainly in the typologies of buildings, geometrical procedures, and structural calculation methodology. Most of the ETSA's work are pavilions for factories, churches, gymnasiums, warehouses, shopping malls, and other programs consistent with long spans covered by reinforced ceramic roofs. The work of Gabinete de Arquitetura includes houses and institutional buildings that reach up to 4 floors. While the ETSA concentrated his efforts on the use of reinforced ceramic in self-supporting shells, Benítez and Cabral make extensive use of concrete. In a few buildings of Gabinete de Arquitetura, the brick has a structural role in load-bearing walls. In others, is a simple veneer masonry. However, in most of them, the brick works as a complement to concrete structures, acting as light aggregate, as permanent formwork, or still helping to resist compression efforts. While the ETSA based his drawings on sophisticated calculation procedures and used material with previously verified characteristics, Benítez and Cabral used one-to-one prototypes made with common brick without proven resistance. That is because, according to Benítez in Paraguay, there's not the skilled labor, the rigor of calculation, and the certified material that the ETSA had at his disposal in the works he built in Uruguay and Brazil. The ETSA developed a semi-empirical constructive system of laminar geometries of catenary directories, which, in addition to the pre-stressing of the mortar that covers the brick, enables the reduction of the thickness without concerns about limits other than constructive ones and the risk of buckling. Conversely, the structures developed by Benítez and Cabral behave like bars. That is, they are almost equally requested in the 2 dimensions of the cross-section and little requested in relation to the length, as well as beams, pillars, grids, and porticos, for example, and unlike the ETSA's laminar structures, which have extensive surfaces compared to their thickness. While the ETSA uses the full-sized stretcher or shiner brick, Benítez and Cabral often tilt it, break it in half, or smash it, and lay it with generous joints of protruding mortar. Despite the roughness of the naturally porous textures of the ceramic brick, the ETSA surfaces denote regularity and uniformity, which are opposed to the uncanny feeling caused by the extremely rough surfaces and by the more unusual and diverse handling of Paraguayan knobs. Benítez studied architecture in the 80s. While in some countries of Latin America, such as Brazil and Chile, this was a period of positive review of the modern movement by specialized critics. In Paraguay, this decade was the culmination of the crisis of modern architecture, which was already sparsely represented in the country. So for architects who graduated in Paraguay in the 80s, the modern source was much more in foreign productions than in works built locally. Although it's possible to point out the ETSA's reference to the work of Benítez and Cabral, probably the main similitude lies in the confidence placed in the potential of ceramic brick and the desire to break the technical limitations of this popular, cheap, and widely known material, taking from it its under suspicion status and giving it the possibility to shape plastically expressive architectural elements in which it does not usually appear. Moreover, the dissimilarities, instead of putting one production in opposition to the other, evidences the inclusiveness and diversity of modern architecture, a formal system that still admits expansion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sueli. I would like now to introduce Juan Alejandro Saldarriaga Sierra. He is a professor at the National University of Colombia, Medellin. He has a doctorate at the School of Higher Studies in Social Sciences, developed between 2002 and 2008 in France, a master from the Magister University of Paris, developed between 2001 and 2002, and an undergraduate degree from the Universidad Pontifícia Bolivariana, He is currently a member of faculty of the National University of Colombia in Medellin, and his interest in research lies on architecture and landscape heritage, as well as methods and theories of architecture. So I welcome Juan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and good day to you all. My presentation is entitled The In-Between Practice, La Fragua and Previ by Germán Samperneco. And I start by saying that modern dualism has prevented us from understanding the twin concepts of private and public, inside, outside, or human being and the environment. Knowing how to articulate these polarities is a fundamental question for architecture. We can see a certain tradition following this aim in the work, for example, of Gottfried Semper's theory of weaving, understood as a technical and symbolical principle of architecture, or in the in-between theory of Aldo van Eyck and Allison and Peter Smithson. I intend to use this composite theory to analyze two projects by the Colombian architect, La Fragua and Previ, and to show Samper's involvement in this theory of the in-between. These first two images are practically contemporary from 1959, and they show also a crucial year for modern architecture as prophesied by the early pioneers. The in-between theory refers to the space of relationship between societies and their environment, medium, which would be the domain of architecture itself. It could be said that the main objective of architecture is the construction of this relationship, or what some authors have called spatial weaving, with reference to the principle of weaving. Vitruvius said or wrote in his second book that the first builders planted pitchforks, and weaving the openings with branches and covering them with mud, they formed their walls. Pursuing the same idea in the 19th century, German architect Gottfried Semper and his theory of weaving shows architecture's main motive as a knot, and the first work of architecture as a rug. In the 20th century, we could say that the in-between theory suggested by various ETSAM members follows this same line. At ETSAM 7, 1951, in Hodetson, Jab Bakema says this: every day we discover that the only thing that exists is relationships, and perhaps we can even say that the goal of human life is to become aware of the governing principles of a full life. This seems to be the reason why, in the development of spatial conceptions in architecture and town planning, we speak so often of continuity of space. For us in ETSAM, the relations between things are of greater importance than the things themselves. This statement seems to come from one of Piet Mondrian's remarks, and is also quoted in Aldo van Eyck's posthumous book, The Child, the City, and the Artist. Mondrian says life is a continuous transformation, and the new culture is one of pure relations. The Colombian architect Germán Samper arrived as a student in Paris in 1948, thanks to a fellowship from the French government, but with the firm intention of working in Le Corbusier's atelier. Until 1954, when he returned to Colombia, he could witness a turning point in modern architecture and could participate in 3 ETSAM reunions: Bergamo, Hodetson, and Aix-en-Provence. In his entire career, there is an evident interest in public space and in relating private and public realms, but also societies and their environments. the Sena building in Bogota from 1958 could be an early example of this interest. In formal terms, La Fragua neighborhood has a striking resemblance with Piedmont's compositions or relations from 1970. Samper studied architecture in the newly built Faculty of Architecture of the Universidad Nacional in Bogota, the White City, as was popularly known, designed by German architect Leopoldo Rotter, who was also one of his teachers. Of great influence was also another of his teachers, Gabriel Serrano, a prolific architect and engineer who maybe also taught him learning architecture through drawing. Serrano made a trip to Brazil to learn from its modern architecture in 1948, bringing with him even a Portinari tile mural. His article published in Proa in 1948 shows his observations and learnings in a sort of Corbusian way. This was also a time of the riots in Bogota after the murder of populist leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitán on the 9th of April, 1948, and also the time of Le Corbusier's urban planning for Bogota. One can see a very rigorous application of Serrano's method from his arrival in Paris and throughout his more than 1,000 drawings made during his stay in Le Corbusier's atelier. Before his acceptance in the Atelier Rue de Sèvres, he met Rogelio Salmona and Georges Candilis, to whom he volunteered in the preparation of the Siam in Bergamo, led by Ascoral, or the French Siam. In this image, we can see Samper drawing the Congress template in his notebooks, centered on architecture's relation to its milieu, or environment, and Samper making his approximation from South America. This was the introduction of the term habitat in Siam's vocabulary. Multiple intermediate spaces appear in his sketchbooks from the Siam Congress, like this Plaza Vecchia of Bergamo. But with an abundance of drawings, after his return from Europe, he chooses to publish the ones from his honeymoon trip to the Balearic Islands. In his article, he focuses on the courtyard or patio of traditional houses, as can be seen in these intermediate spaces of Majorcan farms. And in his text starts by saying, the real interest lies in peasant architecture. This is a larger image from one of the Majorcan courtyard houses called Camberry. And here, Camberry, and here we can see the town where he stayed, named Deja, and the house where the couple stayed for 2 months, in a house whose owner was Magdalena. He also points out that it was Jose, the bricklayer, who explains to him that the house begins with the water well. This is a great lesson in sustainability, which was ahead of its time. Samper draws practically every component of the island's environment, but he focuses on the house porches and other intermediate spaces. As for example, this farm's vestibule, or this magnificent patio of Cansimon. But also the house relationship to its immediate surroundings and ways of communication. This here mark D is a street and is a way of communicating. It's not the sea like maybe you think. At his return to Bogota in 1954, Samper designed this collective housing for the Banco Central Hipotecario in Cúcuta. The self-building project La Fragua in Bogota began in 1956 with the idea of Samper and his wife, to make some organized and owned tenant houses with a maximum area of 30 square meters, In 1958, Angel Maria Lopez, the family's driver, asked the couple to help in building his own house, and they told him to get other families interested also in self-building, and they made like a solidarity construction during the weekends and on the nights. The urban approach to La Fragua begins with breaking up the monotonous row houses to generate unity in variety. Paired houses rotate in different positions, allowing intermediate spaces to evolve, and gradually reducing the road sections from motorways to pedestrian paths and small plazas. The sections between houses in this drawing are 8, 5, and 3, but afterwards in the Proa magazines, the distances between houses are 5 and 3.5 meters. The houses have 2 entries, one for the household and another for a free development, workshop, or renting space. The facade is an in-between space in itself. Outside there is a bench, an entry platform, a tripod, a tripod and a window. Inside, the facade becomes a shelf, and there is even a half-closed door or an intermediate door. I don't know how to call it. The attic is another intermediate space. You can see on the right, perhaps of great symbolic importance as a receptacle for creativity. Finally, we see the back room serving as a connection between the houses and their surroundings. This here is a workshop, and this here can be a classroom. I will now pass to the Prairie contest from 1969, 10 years after. And in this image from Peterland, one of the contest organizers, one can see some pair placed beside his old friend, George Candilis, and also very near to Aldo Van Eyck's design. The constructed houses, or the first plates, show an economic analysis of Peruvian housing styles, suggesting the house also as a means of social promotion and better living. He reviews the traditional Corralón Limeño, a collective housing in Lima within a sole street or pedestrian path. Samper also draws lessons from the upper-class quintas from the 19th century and shows the advantages and disadvantages of Siam style planning. He pursues the analysis of Lima's colonial grid, shown in this image, and he also analyzes street corners in the center of Lima, like these intermediate spaces. But principally, he draws examples from the Quinta Jerén. He explains the villa, it's a 19th century villa. He explains this villa as a fine example of an urban interior space, providing public intimacy, lost in most traditional spaces. And he makes a sort of promenade architectural promenade of these spaces. In one, he says a door that encloses a space inside several groups of homes. Through a narrower entrance, a central space is discovered. Coexistence of 1- and 2-story houses. Human scale in all spaces, fine relation between constructed and open spaces. And through broken parameters, the spaces are closed discreetly, hinting at a continuity. I will speed up a little bit. He chooses a square lot of 100 meters because, as he says, has many advantages in flexibility, not only inside but outside. The square admits more access points, which provides more internal possibilities. And finally, the square admits on its 4 sides an infinity of ways of grouping. He makes this like tryouts and settles for the final image, number 5. And as in La Fragua, he gradually reduces the street sections, and we can see a similar layout as in La Fragua. I'm going to speed up a little bit. I think the only difference we can make with La Fragua is this group of houses has a gate. It's a closed public space. So I think is one of the greatest differences. He says it's the Lima's way to close spaces with gates. He makes 5 typologies, and I'm just gonna finish with the spaces he chooses for these typologies. They all are based on Lima's habits. First, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a space disposable for workshop, rental. But principally, what he chooses is the house is generated towards a patio that permits life outside, the outdoor life inside a patio, and relations between all the spaces involved. I think I passed my 15 minutes, but you can see here images of the type 1 house centered around the patio, with another patio on the second level where there is a kind of voyeur, or a person not so much regarding landscape, but his community, I think, outside. So I will leave it there with these images that maybe provide you with more interpretations of intermediate spaces in Samper's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. So I would like to introduce Professor Eduardo Comas. Professor Comas is a retired full professor in the Department of Architecture at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, with whom he has currently a relationship of guest professorship, accredited to act as a permanent professor and advisor, both in master and doctorate levels of research and postgraduate program of architecture at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. He coordinates the areas of theory, history, and criticism of architecture, where he carries out teaching and research activities. He graduated as an architect from the same university, the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and holds a master's in urban planning and architecture from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a PhD in architectural design and urban design from the University of Paris. He was a coordinator of the research graduate program of Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and also a coordinator of diverse nucleus of Docomomo in Brazil, and also internationally. He was a member of the advisory committee of CNPq and also CAPES, and he was also involved in a series of editorial and curatorial projects internationally. It's with great honor that we received the participation of Professor Comas in this conference. Thank you, Professor Comas, and please, the word is yours.
Well, thank you, Mariana, for your kind words, and good day, everybody. SESC, it stands for Serviço Social do Comércio. Serviço Social do Comércio is a non-profit private institution active in Brazil since 1946, and the quality of its social condensers is high, and their program has hardly changed in 50 years. The most celebrated units involved the partial reuse of rather ordinary shelters by far from ordinary architects. Bobardi recycled a factory for leisure and built towers for sports in a district where mid-rises were replacing industrial plants, and workers' housing. The L-shaped parcel fuses a corner lot with an alley between sheds and a true lot where a creek runs from one front to another. Bobadi had a clear notion of the future. Her plan comes next. Cafeteria and storerooms occupy the inner sheds. Administration, a huge covered plaza, roofed passage that becomes a administration, a huge covered plaza with library, lounge, and exhibit spaces, a roofed passage over it becomes the theater foyer. This is the theater proper and workshops. And towers for sports and water occupy at one end. The creek was covered by a boardwalk running all the way through. Bobardi replaced clay tiles by translucent tiles at the covered plaza, and the sheds became intimate shelters, including a tribute to Niemeyer's curves. The alley kept its granite pavers, but plaster was removed from the existing walls and brick exposed. Concrete after Artigas, after Villanova Artigas, same pavers as the alley, and a translucent roof distinguished the theater foyer. Bobardi designed the furniture for all public spaces. Comfort is a bourgeois notion, she said. So people stand up and dance. Workshops come in different configurations, and the towers resemble their neighbors in silhouette, but not in fenestration. We see brick rooftops, we see gray walls, bloody red windows, and two fortresses that figure entangled warriors, walkways as spears. The towers watch over the boardwalk, working as a beach equipment. Irregularly spaced balconies also signal difference. Walkways have a view. They are near symmetrical, as befits a good Persian carpet. The gym tower is pentagonal in place, slightly protuberant below, castle-like. The water tower appears as a giant candle, homage to Barragan, Lina said. At the pool, the clear span of 40 by 40 meters is not for the faint-hearted. And the courts are painted in bright, kitschy colors. A transit tribute to Lucio Costa ends this imaginary tour or virtual walk, and suddenly huge, the whole frames cutouts of the city, the sky, trees, and mountains. Bobardi called Sesca Pompeia a citadel of freedom. Terribilità, she implied, is as necessary as bellezza in the city. Appeasement as necessary as provocation. Mendes da Rocha recycled a 12-story high Art Deco department store in a square corner lot. Sorry. At the heart of downtown. At the heart of downtown. He stripped the store to its bones and added. Are you seeing the full figure here?
Yes, we see it.
The full one?
Yes.
Because I have your faces above them.
Yeah, we see the full. We see 4 images now.
Okay.
In one slide.
Okay, fine.
Very good.
Okay, fine. Okay, he added a pool at the rooftop, a theater at the basement, introducing some double height spaces in between. The ground, 4th and 12th floors are left open to the public. As 3 types of public lounges. Zoning is straightforward. There are 4 floors of public facilities below, topped by the cultural block. Topped by the cultural block. Then there is a floor of dental service, the sports blocks, and a pool-related block at the end. Each block has 3 floors. The building next door was bought and demolished, giving way to a service tower. Ramps and elevators were added along the internal lot lines of the original parcel, and horizontal slits and horizontal. And horizontal and sorry. Technology. Horizontal slits correspond to the public lounges and the sports block. Vertical slits correspond to the 4th floor public lounge and to the sports block. No, come on. Sorry, I'm making this a mess.
It's okay. We're following you.
Okay, so, okay, well, you get the picture. Okay, I guess. Okay, this is a figure ground Nolly type map, galleries in the neighborhood, and you can see how they prolong this the public lounge gallery shortcut at the ground floor. A is for the new for the service tower, the very narrow plot that Cesc bought, and here is the new circulation core that Mendes da Rocha devised. E is for information and membership services. Okay, this is the view from the corner. There's a tripartite elevation. There is everything. Oh, come on! Every time I use the mouse, I'm nervous. Tripartite elevation, the milk glass hides electrical wiring. Here's the service tower. Oh, come on. And you can see the 4th floor slate signaling difference as the windows in Bardy's unit. This is the corner showing the mezzanine and the old structure. Okay, the greenish curtain wall reflecting the gallery in front of the she reflects and distorts the gallery across the street. Pink and green. In green, it's a very unusual, I would say, color combination. It's very much samba school. The ground floor public lounge gallery. It's a very low ceiling. You can see the open to the gallery. afterwards. The double height central space. This is a water cistern, and you can see one of the 4 huge new columns. The corner of the food hall. The 4th floor public lounge. This photo was taken at the inauguration party, and you can see how it relates to the gallery in front of it. The triple height balcony at the 4th floor public lounge. The new ramps and their columns. Shot of the library. Exhibition space. You have to your left, you see the ducts and cables and the wiring that are left exposed. And I think this is a good opportunity to call attention to the layer ceiling that somehow preserves the characteristic horizontality of modern architecture. This is the double height central space for the cultural block. All those double height central space are in the addition. Workshops, double height central space, sports block, inflatable rubber equipment for sports so that you can change this space by changing equipment. The double height balcony of the sports block. Sometimes the same space now use it for rhythm gymnastics. The dance hall. I wonder why it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, the ramps again. The toilets. Here, the toilets and the service tower. This is 10th floor pool garden. This is one of the public lounges with the pond working as foot basin. This is looking down from the pool garden to the sports balcony. There is a slit at that part of the section. There is a slit between the balconies and like spaces and the circulation cord. So this is unexpected verticality in the whole scene. The changing rooms. Those are fitted in below the pool itself. And the walk ends in an open plaza where visitors and users may dream about time stopping, and everything becomes kind of luxury, calm, and voluptuousness, as in Baudelaire's poem. The pool is 25 meters square, supported by 8 columns beside the tetrapylon, the 4 internal columns, and regular geometry rises above the skewed and imperfect hybrid structure, existing structure, proposing an island of order and beauty among the urban wilderness. Okay, this is my dualities chart. I couldn't stay away from a meeting that talked about dualities, and much the better if they are streamed. So this is a kind of a chart that was made using trying to chart moods, materiality, geometry, structure, character, composition, affinities, attitudes, and implications. So Pompeia, to your left, is all about affect, extroversion, warm, rough, thick surfaces and volumes, heaviness, terribilità, awesomeness, sublimity. Lina is epic, heroic, and she prefers the load-bearing wall and the solar plan. She is crazy about figuration. Arte povera is one of her addictions. We have a combination of matte building and freestanding towers, and an interest, a manifest interest in the industrial vernacular. Affinities, I think that Barragan, she already mentioned that, but also Kahn, in the sense that she prefers in the new works, she rather opts for a large room instead of the free plan of the Franco-Brazilian modern tradition. Her erudite quotes are explicit, and you can also see the comparison between square meters and the area of both structures that are more or less similar, but the floor ratio is 1.44 in the Pompeia's case, while the floor to area ratio in Paulo's case is 12. You know, and then Lina is in a way. In spite of the aggressiveness of the towers, she's mellow too. And in a way, what she is saying in her recycling stuff is, in my way, that you can interpret it as an idea that time tames architecture, and she shows off, you know, her mellowness. While on the right side, you know, I would think that the right word for 24 de Maia is cool. It's all about intellect and extroversion. The surfaces and the volumes are cold, smooth, thin, lightness, and instead of awesomeness, you get poise, you got casualness, and you get beauty. Paulo is ironic, it's nonchalant, and he loves the freestanding column, the free plan, abstraction, and there is a kind of a streak in my way, in my view, of pop art, and I think that we will have to remember that '68 was the pop art biennale in São Paulo, and as for occupation of the lot, it's almost 100%. And while Lina goes for industry, I think that like Robert Venturi, Paulo has an eye for the commercial vernacular. Affinities are Corbusier, Costa, Niemeyer, Artigas, and the attitude regarding preexistences is harsh. And I would frame his attitude as one in which he accepts that time devours architecture instead of taming it. Okay. Now, this is my similarities chart. You know, I think that besides the obvious fact that they are both adaptive, partial adaptive reuses of existing structures, well, both are box office and critical hits. You know, they are a success in terms of both architects and critics, but also the general public. They are formally hybrid and evolutionary rather than pure and evolutionary. They are imbued with a highly developed consciousness of time and place. They show modern architecture to be alive and multiple, and they are definitely engaged with the existing city and the disciplinary culture. Social condensers celebrating pleasurable leisure. Instead of being stoic, they are Epicureans. And also, they exemplify for me a new type of subdued democratic monument, offering either covered or open versions of the public plaza, while extracting poetry out of ordinary spoils. Covered plaza is very much, I would say, a Latin American thing. And when you speak about covered plaza, I recollect, Venezuela. I recollect the covered plaza of the University City in Caracas, but also the Ibirapuera Park and also MASP. And they use simple design strategies. They signal difference from contest. Defenestration, for instance, it's a very simple move, and thus increase memorability. They are machines habitées as well as machines émouvoir. They function, they are shelters, and they touch us. They are monuments. They dramatize ducts and rhetorically expose their working in trails along with the structural elements, creating a succession of tableaux best enjoyed following straightforwardly yet expertly choreographed works. Something is happening. On the one hand, they challenge the typological reductionism and the fetishization of uninterrupted open space and battlefield ground by some strands of the modern movement. On the other hand, they imply that any work of architecture is both monument and shelter, instead of either monument or shelter. Complementary elements in a mix rather than mutually exclusive elements. Pompeii was listed as a national heritage in 2015, so it's a certified public monument now. But the monumentality of both Pompeii and 24 de Mayo results from the bold qualification of old utilitarian fragments by new material. And so they problematized an ongoing trend of indiscriminately conferring heritage value to every vestige of the past. At the same time, they reject the tabula rasa approach to renewing the contemporary city. The city is their horizon, a tantalizing image of the end of the walk in each unit. And both Bobardi and Mendes da Rocha talk the talk and walk the walk to show that no business like show business, architecture matters. I had much fun doing this light image where you have the pink and red colors of Mangueira, where you have on your right Arte Povera by Alighiero Boetti, pop art by Robert Indiana, and our very own national pop contribution by Antonio Henrique do Amaral. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Comas.
And sorry for all the...
You did very good. So I would like to invite our guest, Fernanda Karlovic. Fernanda has a Master of Science in Critical, Curatorial, and Conceptual Practices at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation of Columbia University, and also a Bachelor of Architecture and Urbanism from the School of Architecture at the University of São Paulo. She's currently a director at the Turquoise Dyson Studio, and she has an extensive practice in architecture relative to exhibition design and other artistic practices. Before we continue, I'd like to welcome the audience to formulate questions. Please join us in the debate. It will be a brief debate as we won't have a whole lot of time, but I do welcome your participation. So please do write your reflections, and that is inclusive of the participants in the chat, and then we'll see what we can get into right after Fernanda's presentation. So Fernanda, please.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking for this opportunity. This is especially important to me because FAUSP is my alma mater, where I dream to return soon. This presentation is an outcome of my master thesis that was finished in May 2020, directed by Professor Felicity Scott as part of the CCCP program at Columbia ETSAM. Oh no. This research arose from a personal encounter with the image of a woman walking over a concrete dome. Alia Farid's video performance for the 32nd São Paulo Art Biennial was recorded in the Rashid Karami International Fairgrounds in Tripoli, Lebanon, to be screened in the Ibirapuera Park in São Paulo, Brazil. When watching the video, I was caught by a feeling of an estranged familiarity, for the dome in Tripoli is in direct tension with an important form of the Brazilian architecture imaginary, one that not by accident also appears instantiated right outside the biennial pavilion. The artist explored the semiotic resonance of those two sites through close-ups and carefully positioned shots that make one question whether the scenery is familiar or not. I had never been to the fairgrounds, but in watching Farid's movements, I could almost feel the texture of the dome's curved ground under my own feet, as I've experienced it before growing up in São Paulo. She circles around the dome twice, effortless. While conquering the geography of Tripoli's dome, the artist presents herself as an active and self-aware female body that contaminates the ideal laying on the beach body encrypted in the curve of such architecture. Or so the story goes. The video zooms out, finally unveiling the surrounding Lebanese landscape to the Brazilian biennial audience, a new landing ground to a familiar dome. Farid's video carries back to Brazil a form that traveled to Lebanon in 1962 with architect Oscar Niemeyer. The spaces created by this traveling dome are endowed with an uncanniness on account of their repeated form. From an analysis of the dome in São Paulo, Tripoli, and taking into consideration Brasilia, this research understands travel as the repetition of a formal solution and its mediatic dissemination, which allowed this architecture to reach territories beyond its original locations. The dome's travel, I want to argue, can be read as a symptomatic episode of the post-war developmentalist agenda in the Global South. By researching the historical background of these projects, it is possible to trace affinities that go beyond the architecture's form, since both countries, Brazil and Lebanon, were immersed in ideas of development, and both projects, the architectural and national, were interrupted. While in Brazil, the fiction of democratic consolidation with the inauguration of Brasilia in 1960 was postponed by the 1964 military coup, in Lebanon, the national development and cultural emancipation represented by the fairgrounds was suspended by the Civil War in 1975. Niemeyer's Brazilian and Lebanese domes are interconnected by ideas of progress, modernity, colonial heritage, and nation building. This presentation will be structured in two sections. The first, one narrative of development, focuses on the dome's conception, both in Lebanon and Brazil. And the second section deals with the afterlives of this project, and it's called Multiple Narratives of Appropriation. And I think Ciro Miguel is in the panel, so I just want to thank him for the photos. One narrative of development. In 1954, an international fair took place in São Paulo as part of the year-long celebrations for the 4th centennial of the city. Ibirapuera Park was built to host the celebrations and later become an urban park in the manner of the great Western metropolises. The slogan of the event, São Paulo, the fastest growing city in the world, communicates much of the series of euphoria in the beginning of the 50s. Carlos Acelemos, the head of Niemeyer's office in São Paulo, spoke of the lack of specificity to the project's program of needs. Instead of a brief with the program's requirements, the guidelines for the project were to create spaces to combine, quote, everything that could amaze the world about Brazilian progress, end of quote. If in São Paulo, the fourth centennial events aim to consolidate the image of an already fast-growing metropolis, in Tripoli, the International Fair was to be the starting point for the growth of the city. Located in the rural area between two urban nodes of Old Tripoli and the littoral Almina, the fairgrounds were intended to generate a third centrality to connect and help increase Tripoli's urban fabric. The fairgrounds were part of a five-year program of administrative reforms and major construction works orchestrated by left-wing President Fouad Chebab in the so-called Golden Age of Lebanon in the 60s. Niemeyer's invitation in the name of President Chebab, 2 years after the inauguration of Brasilia, shows the president's intention to establish an unaligned kinship. After all, Niemeyer iconized a modern architecture detached to, but still in close dialogue with, the colonialist bias of the developed world. A communist Brazilian architect was a perfect fit to the ideologies of Chebab, representing the endorsement of political ideology in addition to the aesthetic ideals of modernism. Taking press media as a main primary resource, this section inquires how developmentalism relates to the commission, the program, the architectural solution, and the language around the two projects in São Paulo and Tripoli. Even with their differences in scale, they both channeled a similar mindset, a desire to establish their countries as great nations of the world, making their way along an inexorable path towards progress. In addition to ideology, these projects share multiple modernist tropes. They were publicized by stage photos of a group of all white men pointing to a big architectural model. They were expected to become the most modern construction in the world, according to local newspapers. They represented a unique technological achievement for their countries, one made possible by the large availability of unskilled labor. They also share architectural gestures, a big marquee in relation to monumental smaller units surrounded by rich vegetation with organic paths, palm trees, and a dome. And finally, they were both created to host international fairs, serving as showcases for the progress of their cities, generating real estate interest and attracting the eyes of an international audience. Fairgrounds are perfect breeding grounds for domes. A dome requires open space for its landing, or better, it demands an environment of neutral context, a playing field of green grass. Without interaction with the city that exists in its surroundings, this architecture dissociates itself from the existing urban fabric to create a new landscape of simple lines, few colors, and legible geometry. But to open space is necessarily an act of displacement. In the case of São Paulo, Ibirapuera Park took the place of an old indigenous land that at the time was being used by families in informal settlements. In Tripoli, the fairgrounds are built on top of private orange fields that were sold to the municipality for a very low price, a forced dispossession for the sake of progress. Progress that is translated into the image of construction, of tireless men working day and night to build modernity. The free dome on a large field speaks of the lack of roots to this architecture, that neglects internal dynamics to produce a crystallized image of future. Multiple narratives of appropriation. So this second session explores the afterlives of the domes through a closer look into the scale of the building, the political space of the dome, and the organization of bodies that it generates. Breaking with the pure metaphorical interpretation of the dome as a symbol of a political thought, it is possible to read it as a material reality that creates sites of interaction with the subjects that inform and respond to that political ideology. The years that followed the conception of these projects dealt with several forms of interruption. After the opening of Ibirapuera, its main buildings were left empty without definite use. In Tripoli, the process of construction of the fairgrounds extended for 12 years, with constant rescheduling and imminent financial breaks, and even then was never completed. In 1975, with the rise of the Lebanese Civil War, the site was walled and suddenly transformed into a military base, following the invasion of its premises by the Syrian army. This unsettling nexus of development, politics, conflict, and geometry has led to multiple reprogrammings of Niemeyer's domes. The domes have been claimed and climbed upon. Their shells exist as separators of two spatial ambitions. One that is continuously trying to organize bodies within a mode of architectural space, and another that accommodates bodies in unexpected ways and triggers transgression on the outside. I look at these emblematic cases as a way of describing the infinite possibilities of interactions with a building, semantic and programmatic. I hope to illustrate, to borrow from Anna Singh, the multiple futures that pop in and out of possibility, to contrapose assumptions that the future is that singular direction ahead. Examples of this bodily interaction abound. The construction workers climbing the dome to build its framing, carefully photographed by Marcel Gauthiereau in Brasília. The young kids that run over Oca in Ibirapuera Park, ignoring the prohibition signs. The citizens that gather in celebration in the election day of the first democratic president after the dictatorship in Brasília, 1986. Spanning from leisure to artistic exploration, political protests, and festivities, the domes are sites for collective assembly. In Tripoli, I met a musician named Adel Minkara, who grew up in the city following the decades of construction of the fairgrounds. He told me that during the Syrian invasion, he and his friends would jump the fences to the fairgrounds to play soccer, and that they used to climb the dome and sometimes play soccer on top of it. I told him I used to climb the dome in São Paulo as well. And he said their dome was easier to climb because it had a sort of stair of bullet marks carved in the concrete. I am interested in these transgressive movements that seem orchestrated in, between, and over these different locations. Niemeyer's traveling domes worked as an instantiation of a future that hasn't come to be for Lebanese and Brazilian societies. Instead of continuously reinforcing these stories as promises of an ideal, it is vital to broadening our gaze to the coexistence of multiple narratives that aspire to new ways of imagining the future. I went to Lebanon in November of 2019, 2 weeks after the eruption of the Lebanese Revolution. In the context of a nationwide protest, museums, libraries, universities, and archives were closed. the research took new paths and got defined by its restrictions. I traveled to Tripoli to see the fairgrounds when many of the roads were blocked. I arrived after a 5-hour Uber drive. Going through the entrance gate felt exactly how I had imagined. The sensations of Alia Farid's work came back instantly. Something about those buildings made me feel at home. The space, proportions, and materials are so familiar to me that I explore it as a visitor of yesteryear. A few months later, my visit to Ibirapuera Park was somewhat melancholic. With the dissolution of the Ministry of Culture at the beginning of President Bolsonaro's mandate in January 2019, and the almost no existing support for culture, I found another empty building. Unlike the dome in Tripoli, Oca is finished and white, although not as white as I remember. The only inhabitants of that building were the properly positioned fire extinguishers, as a museum requires, but then nothing had to be shown in the museum. Lebanon and Brazil are countries with very different stories. The Tripoli Fairgrounds and Ibirapuera Park are also significantly different spaces, but both of my travels, for some reason, were marked by absence. Spaces that haven't fulfilled their intended function, and at the same time seems to be awaiting for the next occupation, the next cycle of hope. But we don't need to guide our narratives through promises and failures. Buildings come into existence in a complex reality and change through the frictions and roughness of the lived experience. The linear future sought by the design of these projects is displaced by multiple futures of social appropriation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda, for the beautiful presentation. I think we have a very special closure to our session. So I would like to open again for questions. If anybody would like to take part, we have very few minutes for discussion, but still, please do share your thoughts through the chat. I wanted to lift up a couple dualities that I found common to the projects that were presented, but I know we won't have much time to unpack. In any case, I wanted to mention that I was especially touched by the approximation that Professor Comas made between the notion of heritage and monumentality in the sense of the two projects that were presented. And he touched on that towards the end of his presentation, but my question was relative to this, when you say in your text that the buildings confer heritage value to every vestige of the past. And in some ways, that is what bridges the keyword of your essay, which is modern monumentality. And I wonder if you could comment a bit on this notion of heritage based on the past, but also a projective heritage that touches on culture to bridge with the panel that we had before. I would like, you mentioned in your text the importance of the administration of SESC to the life of these buildings, the life of buildings that were so beautifully portrayed by Fernanda's presentation as well. So I wonder if you could make a few comments with regards to what could be a heritage of the future that the two buildings bring forth. I think you're muted.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. Which I pointed out was the fact that first, the SESC projects would not have been possible if both the factory and the Mesbah store had been declared heritage. So in a way, when what Lena and what Paulo have been doing is a very modern project that uses fragments, vestiges of the past, but in terms of ordinary material that is not necessary to be preserved. So I have this kind of mixed feeling about the heritage, when heritage becomes conservation of everything. I think that yes, we need to preserve, but we also need to destroy. Destruction is part of the city, and it's part of human life. And this is something that I was trying to express by my comparison between the way both buildings, both designs, speak about the past. I think that when I say that Lena believes is telling us that when she replaces the clay tiles in the roof of the covered plaza by translucent tiles, the light changed completely. And what was, the rough environment, the sweaty environment of the factory, brutal, aggressive, becomes domestic, becomes appeased. So it's a completely different emotional mood, and the quotations, Artigas, Costa, and Niemeyer, I think, go in that sense, and telling us what once was polemical and mind-boggling, thought-provoking, in due time will be softened, and you can stop that passage of time. I think that Paulo also has the same idea, but I think that Paulo is much more, cold-blooded in his action. And there is a data that one should add that I didn't mention. I don't think that I mentioned it in the text either, is the fact that the narrow lot where now the service and administration tower rises used to be the Fasano Vertical Restaurant by Telesforo Cristofani, which was a very interesting, a very brilliant piece of the Paulista School. Okay. So he demolished it, and he also left, the Mesbla only, the core. So the attitude, in a way, is much more surgical than Lena. But in a way, both are right in the sense that we can't help seeing, the future both taming and devouring the past. And in that sense, heritage is a kind of a double-edged sword, because it's an attempt, and maybe it's futile, because actually it's never the same thing. As soon as something becomes heritage, it somehow loses the warm,
vibrancy.
Yes, or the kind of life, the kind of life changes, and you can see it in house museums. House museums are not houses anymore.
Yes.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Very interesting. Yes, wonderful, Professor Comas. Thank you for completing that theme. I wish we had more time, as I'm really engaged and interested in all the work that's being presented. I really thank the participants for having shared their knowledge with us in such an impeccable manner, and I wish that the audience also appreciated the sequence. I think we have to move on, as we have more to come. So thank you all, the audience who's joined us for this panel. I hope you can continue across the different sessions of discussion today and tomorrow. Thank you.